The fog didn't just drift, it crept in, heavy with memory, regret, and something far more dangerous. It wrapped itself around the lakeside cabin like a noose tightening, silent but inescapable. In the dead quiet of Northern California's off-season, the lake no longer mirrored the sky, it mirrored guilt, betrayal, and the secrets three people could no longer outrun. Inside, the fire hissed and popped in the hearth, but the warmth it offered felt dishonest. There was no comfort here, only the illusion of it. But before we dive into this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a case, only on True Crime Teejan. Naomi Carter, always precise, always in control, wiped the already gleaming kitchen island for what felt like the 100th time. Each deliberate swipe of the cloth was a futile attempt to wipe away the anxiety that coiled in her stomach. At 38, she had meticulously constructed a life of order and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of her younger years. But that carefully built facade was now showing cracks, threatened by the unwelcome arrival of her past in the form of her brother, Victor. Victor Shaw remained in the living room, a dark silhouette against the flickering firelight. His presence in the cabin was like a physical weight, pressing down on Naomi with the burden of their shared history. 10 years. 10 years he had languished in prison, and for 10 years, Naomi had lived with the lie that had put him there. He was thinner than she remembered, the youthful softness around his jawline replaced by a hard, unforgiving edge. His eyes, once full of a brother's affection, now held a simmering resentment that made her skin crawl. He believed she had betrayed him, that she had taken the stolen money and left him to face the consequences alone. More coffee? Naomi offered, her voice betraying none of the fear that gnawed at her. She needed to maintain control, to appear calm, even as her world teetered on the brink of collapse. Victor finally shifted in his armchair, his gaze flicking towards her, sharp and accusatory. Still playing the perfect hostess, Naomi? His voice was a low, gravelly rasp, a stark reminder of the years he'd spent in confinement. Naomi's grip tightened on the dish rag, the silence stretching taut between them. It's my cabin, Victor. Ours, he corrected, the word heavy with unspoken meaning. At least, it should have been. The cabin, a place of refuge for Naomi, a symbol of her hard-won independence, was now a battleground, the site of their long-overdue confrontation. Just as the tension seemed unbearable, the cabin door creaked open, a blast of damp, frigid air swirling into the warm room. Eli Jameson, Naomi's current boyfriend, entered, shaking the rain from his shoulders like a wet dog. He flashed his trademark charming smile, a stark contrast to the palpable animosity radiating from Victor. Eli was a man of easygoing charisma, quick with a joke and a comforting touch. But Naomi knew the charm was a carefully constructed mask, hiding a man struggling under the weight of his own demons, a mountain of gambling debts that grew higher with each passing week. "Hey, you two," Eli said, his eyes flicking between Naomi and Victor, sensing the charged atmosphere. He leaned in to kiss Naomi's cheek, his touch lingering for a moment, a silent reassurance. He offered Victor a brief nod, the gesture lacking any real warmth. "Everything all right in here?" Victor's gaze, sharp and assessing, lingered on Eli's expensive wristwatch, a recent acquisition that Naomi knew Eli couldn't truly afford. "Couldn't be better," Victor said, the sarcasm thick in his voice. The dynamic was a fragile triangle of suspicion and hidden motives. Naomi, caught between her resentful brother and her increasingly desperate boyfriend, felt like a tightrope walker balancing on a fraying cord. Eli, with his innate ability to read people, sensed the undercurrents of the past swirling between the siblings, and his curiosity, fueled by his own desperate need for money, was beginning to prickle. The following day unfolded with a suffocating slowness. Victor's subtle jabs at Naomi's comfortable life grew more pointed. He recounted the details of the robbery that had landed him in prison, the botched getaway in the dead of night, his eventual arrest. He spoke of his unwavering silence during the interrogation, his refusal to implicate Naomi, even as suspicion hardened around him. "I took the fall for us, Naomi," he'd said, his voice low and filled with a decade's worth of bitterness. "I kept your name out of it. 10 years. And what did I get? Nothing. Naomi met his accusations with practiced denials, her voice calm and measured, betraying none of the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She repeated her carefully rehearsed story, the fear, the flight, the never-seen money. But the lie felt like a heavy stone in her gut, a constant reminder of her betrayal. The truth, she knew, was a fragile thing, easily shattered under the weight of Victor's anger and Eli's growing suspicion. Eli, initially trying to play the role of the affable peacemaker, gradually shifted into the role of observer, his easy charm replaced by a subtle, calculating intensity. He began asking seemingly innocuous questions, probing for details about the robbery, the target, the timing, the supposed amount of money. He would linger in doorways, his ears straining to catch fragments of Naomi and Victor's hushed, tense conversations. He sensed a secret, a hidden treasure, and his desperation was driving him to uncover it. One crisp afternoon, while Naomi claimed to be organizing fishing gear in the boathouse, Eli followed her, his movements casual but deliberate. The boathouse, perched precariously at the end of a weathered wooden pier, was shrouded in an ethereal mist that muffled the sounds of the outside world. Inside, the air was damp and smelled of mildew and decaying wood. Sunlight, filtered through the fog and the grimy windows, illuminated swirling dust motes, creating an almost ghostly atmosphere. Naomi felt Eli's gaze on her as she pretended to sort through tangled fishing lines and rusty lures. She knew he wasn't interested in fishing. He was looking for something else, something more valuable. What she didn't know was that Victor, too, had been watching Eli, his own suspicion of the charming contractor steadily growing. He saw the way Eli's eyes lingered on Naomi, the way he subtly questioned them both, and a protective instinct, twisted by years of resentment, began to stir within him. Later that evening, the tranquility of the lake was shattered by the sudden fury of a storm. The wind howled through the ancient pines surrounding the cabin, rattling the windowpanes like skeletal fingers. Rain lashed against the glass, blurring the already indistinct landscape. The lake, once a mirror reflecting the gray sky, now churned with dark, angry waves. The power flickered erratically, then died completely, plunging the cabin into an oppressive darkness punctuated only by the dancing flames in the hearth and the soft glow of a few strategically placed candles. The darkness seemed to amplify the tension in the room, the silence broken only by the roar of the storm. Victor sat hunched in his armchair, his gaze fixed on Naomi, an unsettling intensity in his eyes. Eli paced restlessly, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a jittery nervousness. He kept glancing towards the windows, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear out of the raging storm. Then, a sharp, cracking sound ripped through the cabin, followed by a heavy, muffled thud. Eli froze mid-stride, his eyes widening with a mixture of fear and a strange, almost feverish excitement. Victor's head snapped up, his senses, honed by years of confinement, instantly on high alert. Naomi's breath hitched in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She recognized that sound. It echoed a moment from 10 years ago, a night she had tried desperately to erase from her memory. Driven by his growing suspicion and a desperate need for a quick solution to his financial woes, Eli had been snooping again. He had remembered seeing Naomi near the boathouse earlier that day, her movements secretive. He had ventured out into the storm, the boathouse key, which he'd subtly lifted from the hook earlier, clutched in his hand. He had found it, a heavy, wooden chest hidden beneath a loose floorboard, just as he'd suspected. But the lock was old and stubborn. Frustrated, he'd gone searching for tools, his movements clumsy in the darkness. The cracking sound was the floorboard giving way under his weight, the thud his body hitting the damp concrete floor. Now, as the tempest raged outside, a more personal and immediate storm was about to break within the confines of the cabin. Victor moved with a speed that belied his confinement. In an instant, he was across the room, his hand closing around the cold, heavy iron poker that leaned against the stone fireplace. Eli backed away, his hands raised in a gesture that was meant to convey surrender but held a glint of calculating desperation in his eyes. What the hell was that? Victor growled, his voice tight with suspicion. Eli swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I just tripped, he stammered, but his eyes kept darting towards the boathouse key hanging innocently on a hook by the cabin door. Naomi's mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and frantic calculations. She knew what was in that chest. Not the stolen money, Victor had taken the bulk of that years ago. Inside the chest, carefully preserved, was the truth, the damning letter she had written to her violent ex-partner, framing Victor for the robbery so she could finally break free from his control and start a new life. She couldn't let Victor find that letter. It would destroy the fragile peace she had managed to build, and it would confirm his deepest suspicions, unleashing a fury she wasn't sure she could contain. As Victor advanced on Eli, the flickering candlelight casting long, distorted shadows on the walls, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. A desperate struggle ensued, a chaotic ballet of flailing limbs and panicked gasps in the dim light. The heavy iron poker flashed in the air, a deadly arc of metal, and then there was another sickening thud, heavier and more final than the first. Eli slumped to the floor, his body hitting the worn wooden planks with a dull thud. A dark stain began to bloom beneath his head, spreading like a malevolent flower. Naomi stared in horrified disbelief at the scene unfolding before her. Eli, with his easy charm and his desperate schemes, was gone. And Victor stood over him, the iron poker still clutched in his hand, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, his chest heaving with exertion. He was snooping, Victor said, his voice low and guttural, his gaze locking onto Naomi's. Looking for the money. There is no money here, Victor, Naomi whispered, her voice trembling, her carefully constructed composure finally beginning to crumble. Don't lie to me, he snarled, his grip tightening on the poker. I know you took it. All of it. He found something else, Naomi said quickly, her eyes darting towards the boathouse key, a desperate plea in her voice. In the boathouse. Victor's suspicion intensified, his gaze following Naomi's to the innocuous-looking key hanging by the door. What's in the boathouse, Naomi? What did he find? Before Naomi could formulate a coherent answer, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the cabin, cutting through the roar of the storm. Both siblings froze, their eyes wide with a shared terror. Police, a firm voice called out from the other side of the thick wooden door. Open up. Detective Marla Reyes hadn't intended for her weekend getaway to involve anything more strenuous than hiking and catching up with her old friend. But the sharp crack of a gunshot, even muffled by the storm and the distance, had been unmistakable. Years of working homicide had ingrained that sound into her very being. She'd made the call to the local sheriff's department, but knowing the limited resources and the time it would take for them to reach this remote location, she had followed her gut instinct and driven to the area from which she thought the sound had originated. The cabin door creaked open slowly, revealing Naomi, her face pale and streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a fear that looked genuine. Behind her, Victor stood rigid, his large frame filling the doorway. He had attempted to conceal the iron poker behind his back, but Marla's sharp eyes, trained to notice the smallest details, didn't miss the unnatural angle of his arm. Marla's gaze swept over the chaotic scene inside the cabin, taking in every detail in an instant. The overturned furniture, the palpable tension that hung heavy in the air, and then she saw him, Eli Jameson, lying still and lifeless on the floor, a dark, viscous pool spreading across the worn wood beneath him. What happened here? Marla asked, her voice calm but authoritative, the natural command of a seasoned detective. Naomi's carefully constructed facade finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she stammered out a disjointed story about self-defense, about Eli suddenly attacking Victor with a knife she hadn't seen. The story felt flimsy, riddled with inconsistencies. But Marla Reyes was a seasoned investigator. She noticed the lack of a visible weapon. She noted the way Victor stood silent and watchful, his eyes filled not with fear, but with a simmering anger. And she saw the way Naomi's gaze kept flicking towards a small wooden key hanging on a hook by the door. Mr. Shaw. Marla addressed Victor directly, her gaze unwavering. "Can you tell me what happened?" Victor remained silent, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Marla and his sister. The silence spoke volumes, a stark contrast to Naomi's frantic, tearful explanation. As Marla continued to assess the scene, her gaze returned to the boathouse key. She vaguely remembered seeing Eli Jameson earlier in the day, lurking near the boathouse, a restless energy about him. A hunch, a gut feeling that had served her well countless times before, told her that the key to this unfolding tragedy lay not within the storm-battered cabin, but in that small, weathered structure by the lake. "What's in the boathouse?" Marla asked, her voice calm but with an underlying steel that demanded an answer. Her eyes were fixed on Naomi, waiting for a reaction. Naomi hesitated, her eyes pleading with Victor. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a silent command, a shared understanding passing between them that Marla didn't miss. "Just some old fishing gear," Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper, avoiding Marla's direct gaze. Marla's lips tightened imperceptibly. "Let's take a look." She gestured towards the door, her authority clear. Naomi and Victor exchanged another tense glance before reluctantly following her out into the receding storm. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing a landscape washed clean by the rain. But a different kind of fog, a dense cloud of deceit and hidden motives, still clung to the lakeside cabin and its inhabitants. As Marla led the way towards the boathouse, the truth, like the hesitant rays of dawn breaking through the clouds, was about to be unveiled. Inside the boathouse, Marla's powerful flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating dusty shelves filled with forgotten fishing tackle, tangled nets hanging like ghostly shrouds, and the detritus of years spent by the lake. Then, her beam settled on it, a section of the wooden floor near the back wall that looked slightly uneven. Kneeling down, she ran her hand along the planks, feeling the telltale give of a loose board. With a grunt of effort, she pried it open, revealing a small, locked wooden chest tucked into the crawlspace beneath. Naomi's breath hitched in her throat, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. Victor's face, illuminated by the flashlight beam, was grim, his eyes narrowed with a mixture of apprehension and a dawning understanding. Marla examined the chest, her experienced eyes taking in the age and the sturdy lock. "Where's the key?" she asked, her gaze sweeping back to Naomi and Victor. Naomi remained silent, her face pale and drawn. Victor, too, offered no answer, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Then, Marla noticed something else, almost hidden in the shadows. Tucked away in a dark corner, nearly concealed beneath a pile of mildewed canvas, lay another key, identical to the tarnished brass key hanging on the hook inside the cabin. "The third key," Marla murmured, the words barely audible above the gentle lapping of the waves against the pier. It was a puzzle piece she hadn't even known was missing. She tried the key from the cabin door first. It slid smoothly into the lock, and with a soft click that echoed in the stillness of the boathouse, the chest sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst faded velvet lining, wasn't the expected stash of stolen cash, but a neatly tied bundle of old, yellowed letters. Marla picked one up, her brow furrowing as she recognized the familiar, elegant script on the envelope. It was addressed to a name Naomi had mentioned earlier, a name that had sent a flicker of unease across Naomi's face. As Marla's eyes scanned the contents of the letter, the remaining pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place, forming a complete and devastating picture. The violent ex-partner, a man whose shadow had loomed large in Naomi's carefully constructed backstory. The desperate plan to escape his clutches. The framing of Victor, the only person who had ever truly stood between her and the man she feared. Victor's decades spent in prison for a crime Naomi had orchestrated. Marla looked up at Victor, a newfound understanding, tinged with a cold sense of justice, in her eyes. He hadn't been solely driven by the desire for the stolen money. He had already had a significant portion of it, stashed away, a silent testament to their criminal past. His true motive for coming to the cabin was revenge, a reckoning for the years stolen from him, a confrontation with the sister who had so callously betrayed him. Then, Marla turned her attention to Naomi, her gaze now hard and unwavering. Eli found this, didn't he? She stated, the question more of an accusation than an inquiry. Naomi finally broke, the carefully constructed dam of her composure collapsing. Tears streamed down her face, silent sobs racking her body. He was going to use it against me, she choked out, her voice thick with despair. He was going to blackmail us both. He said he'd tell Victor everything unless I paid him, a lot. So, Eli had been the unwitting catalyst, the opportunistic fly caught in the web of their shared secrets. He had stumbled upon Naomi's long-hidden betrayal, and in his desperate attempt to exploit it for his own gain, he had sealed his own violent end. Marla's gaze shifted back to Victor. He hadn't confessed to the original robbery, and he certainly hadn't confessed to killing Eli. Self-defense, Naomi had claimed, her voice shaky and unconvincing. But Marla knew the truth was far more complex, a tangled knot of desperation, betrayal, and long-simmering resentment. Victor might have acted in self-preservation, but the years of injustice he had suffered had undoubtedly fueled his actions. The third key, Marla realized, was not just to the locked chest. It was the key to understanding the intricate web of lies and secrets that had bound these three people together. Victor's key was the burning desire for revenge. Eli's key was the desperate hunger of greed. And Naomi's key? It was the desperate, long-buried desire to escape a past that had finally, and violently, caught up with her. As the first weak rays of sunlight finally pierced through the dissipating fog, casting long, distorted shadows across the damp interior of the boathouse, Detective Marla Reyes knew that the carefully constructed order of Naomi Carter's life had irrevocably shattered. This time, there would be no escaping the consequences of her past actions. Marla Reyes was watching, and she wouldn't look away. Thanks for watching True Crime Teejan. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.